Hey everybody, Mr. Sang here. I'm just making this video for those of you who missed out on one of my virtual discussions earlier this week. In it, I kind of talked about phases of the moon and maybe went into a little bit of eclipses for one of the discussions, but if you weren't here for that, I kind of live streamed myself with the class in this virtual reality game that I have that kind of simulates different things. I have the moon over there, here's the earth, and what I'm going to do to make this a little bit more realistic is generate a sun here. Oops, wait. Go to settings. Got to make sure it's stationary, otherwise it may fly away if I don't set it that way. Okay, so for simplicity, I'm going to plop this here. Oops, wrong tool. Go into my tools option. It's a little too close, so I'm going to move this a little further back. Maybe so it's like if I were to position myself here on Earth, maybe it's a little bit bigger than it would be in real life, but whatever. This is just a model. So anyway, you should see that I've got the Earth here, good old North America. And let me move the moon a little bit closer. So for one of the assignments, you had to kind of investigate, play around with the simulation in your browser to kind of model how the phases of the moon work. One of the questions on Monday's homework was, what causes the moon to be bright in the first place. That has to do with the fact that there is light from the sun reflecting off of the surface of the moon. It is not glowing by itself. If I get a little bit closer here, you should be able to see that the moon is only illuminated on one half, and that's just because, there's only one source of light. The only way for the moon to be 100% enveloped in light would be if there was another sun or another source of light somewhere on the other side of the moon. But since we've only got one sun, only 50% of the moon can be illuminated at once. So 50% max is always going to be the case here. If I move the moon to a different location, doesn't really matter where the moon is relative to the Earth, it's always going to have that 50% of its surface illuminated, and it's always going to be the side of the sun that is closest, the side of the moon that is closest to the sun. So anyway, the phases of the moon, however, though, are what we see from Earth. So if I were to actually not pretend like I'm in space anymore and kind of position myself so that I am, hold on, I'm running into furniture in my room, so let me move around a bit. Okay, so the reason why the moon looks different is because we're seeing a different proportion of the lit surface and the dark surface. So if the Earth is in between the moon and the sun, then we can see that it appears to be illuminated completely, and because we're seeing only the portion of the moon that's reflecting that light, so that's a full moon. The opposite of that would be if the moon was on the other side of the Earth, and from our perspective here you can see that the moon's appearance is dark, none of that light, so if I kind of get closer, none of that light reflecting off of the Earth or off of the sun is being reflected towards the Earth, so therefore the moon is, very difficult to see. So that's called the new moon, and that's typically what we'd consider the beginning of a lunar cycle. Moon orbits, I guess if you're looking down from the north, the moon orbits counterclockwise. So as the moon orbits this direction, you can kind of see now that I guess if I want to get this closer, so you can see on your screens at home. If we're here now, you can see that the light of that 50% side that's facing the sun is now slightly visible to us here on the Earth. And this is called the waxing crescent. The light will appear to move onto the moon from right to left as it goes through the cycle. So if you take a look here, now this would be the first quarter. Actually, sorry. So we had, that's right, sorry. We have the waxing crescent, first quarter. So now we can see, from our perspective anyway, 50% of the lit surface and then 50% of the dark, unlit surface of the moon. And then as we go further through the month, now this is what we call the waxing gibbous. It's where the moon has more lit surface than unlit surface from our perspective. If you're trying to think, what's the difference between waxing and waning, at the beginning of the moon cycle, we apply, you could think of the light being applied like a, wax from like the Karate Kid scene in the Karate Kid movie, wax on, wax off. So we are applying wax, or we're applying light to the moon from right to left. If you think like you're right-handed, wax on like that. And as the moon goes through its cycle, we get more waxing of light on its surface until we get to the full moon, which is on the opposite side of the Earth. All right, I'm spinning in a circle. Give me a sec. I have to step over my cable here. Okay. So now that we're at the full moon phase, this is roughly halfway through the lunar cycle. Around probably 14 days in, 2 weeks-ish. So then after the full moon, now we're going on to what we call the waning gibbous. So now waning you could think of as like the end of the cycle, and the light is now beginning to disappear, or you could think of it as the dark is taking over again. So the light will disappear from right to left, and after the waning gibbous, you'll start to see more and more of the unlit side of the moon from our perspective on Earth. So that would be the last quarter here. So 50% of the surface is illuminated from our perspective, but it's the left side instead of the right. And then now as we go here, this is the waning crescent. So just a little sliver of light as it disappears completely, and now we're back at the new moon phase. Okay, so that's phases of the moon. The other assignment that I had us take a look at was eclipses, and I can simulate that here too. And eclipses have to do with shadows. By the way, for those of you in the first moon phases assignment, this dark side of the moon here is not a shadow. A shadow is caused by another object blocking light. This is just, light reaching the sun only hits part of it. The backside is dark because there's no light hitting it. It's not a shadow, it's just, unlit. But eclipses is where we get to talk about shadows, and like I said, a shadow is caused by another object blocking light. So for example, if the moon is in line with the sun, we should see a shadow caused by the moon blocking light here on Earth. So this is what we'd call a solar eclipse. You can see how as the moon moves across the surface, or passes in between the sun and the Earth, the surface of the Earth gets dark. We actually had a solar eclipse last year at the beginning of the school year, and that's what you were experiencing. I don't know if it replicates the umbra and penumbra, but yeah, the umbra is the darkest part of the shadow. That's where you'd see the total lunar eclipses. And then the umbra, which is the lighter portion of the shadow, is where you'd probably see a partial solar eclipse, which is what we witnessed. We didn't see a full solar eclipse. From that perspective, it looks kind of like this. A total solar eclipse would be something like that, where the moon completely blocks out the sun. I don't know what this looks like when I'm recording it because my VR headset captures this in 3D and I can kind of see a different view in each eye, but let me see. I don't know. Let me move the sun further away. Okay. Maybe that's too far. It's gotta be, we'll do that. Okay. So, if the sun is completely blocked out by the moon, we'd call that a total solar eclipse. If the moon only partially blocks out the sun, that would be a partial solar eclipse. And, depending on the kind of angle that the moon is, depending on the, its position in its orbit, you don't always see eclipses every month because the moon actually kind of wobbles. Let's see if I stand here. The moon actually kind of wobbles as it orbits. It doesn't actually go in a completely planar, flat plane when it orbits. So depending on, how much it wobbles, that dictates whether or not we'll have an eclipse. The other kind of eclipse is a lunar eclipse, and that's when the Earth is in the middle and the Earth is the object casting a shadow on the moon. So a lunar eclipse actually happens when the moon is in its full moon position. Normally you would expect it to be very bright because it's, we're seeing the full lit side of the moon. But if it wobbles into the shadow of the Earth, you'll actually get a dark, appearance. It's kind of like this. And yeah, so it'll look like that. Anyway, so those are the two types of eclipses. Hopefully that was useful information. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you sometime soon.